Yeah, let's get started. So, thank you guys for taking the time to just join us and be a part of the service, and just let us just celebrate you guys a little bit and the work that you have done in Thailand, and just the blessing that you've been to our community. But let's get to know you guys. I know so many of our Wellers that they already know you guys pretty well, but tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, and a little bit about what you guys do.
Yeah, so we're Jeff and Karyn Kamphausen, and we have three daughters. Maggie is a junior at Wheaton College, and Anna will be a freshman at Huntington University, and our youngest daughter, Ellie, will be a sophomore at Grace International School, where Jeff works. So, yes, many years ago, we were Wellers, and just sensing that God was moving our hearts to be overseas and to do ministry in an overseas context. So we began to pray about that and asked others at the well to pray with us. And then within a year or so, we found ourselves transitioning to Grace International School,
which is where I have been serving for the last 6 years as a spiritual life director there. So essentially, I'm like the chaplain for the school, which is a school primarily for the students of missionaries. So we are there to support families so that they can complete using their gifts and their callings in the place in Thailand that God has directed them to in Thailand. So we're really grateful for the chance to be a huge support to the global missionary effort that's happening all throughout South Asia. The other thing that Karyn and I do together, we are the team leaders for Teach Beyond, which is a team of about 18 adults that God has sent to Thailand. And we serve as the leaders that support them, to walk with them. And Karyn, this last year, we'll be talking a little bit later in our interview about ways she's been walking with particularly some of the single teachers to encourage them in their spiritual journey. So that's sort of a snapshot of our life in Thailand. We love working with students to help them catch a vision of who God is in their lives as students at Grace International School, so that they can take their relationship with Jesus wherever they go once they graduate.
That's awesome. So tell everyone, how have you seen God sort of move in you guys and the students that you are working with at Grace, or in the various missionaries that you guys support?
There are so many stories of different students that Karyn and I both had a chance to work with over these last 6 years in Thailand. One of the stories I love in particular is very fresh, coming out of this pandemic, which blew everything up for all of us. So school was canceled at Grace, and we're all scrambling around trying to figure out what to do. How do we continue to stay connected in community, particularly for the student leaders I was working with that were leading the chapel ministry? And in the context of our online Zoom calls just like this, the student leaders worked together with me to come up with a beautiful plan of creating an online, what they call the chapel Instagram takeover for our spiritual life accounts at Grace. And our media team leader, her name is Erica Babato. She's a missionary kid from the Philippines, and she ended up taking on this beautiful project, and without freaking out too much, welcomed the input of all the student leaders and created an incredible online chapel experience for students, where we had our band leaders sharing songs, we had students sharing testimonies, we had speakers challenging students to stay connected with God and stay rooted in the midst of the sort of disruption that everything happened about in the pandemic. So it's so great to see students like Erica come to a place of peace, knowing that God would make a way even in uncertain circumstances, and to have her say that she actually will look back on this experience as a time where God shaped her journey to give her more confidence to trust him in the future. So those are some of the ways that I see God working all the time to reveal himself to students at Grace International School, to show them that he's alive, that he's with them, that he loves them and favors them, and wants them to really have roots that grow deep into him so that they can follow him for the rest of their lives.
That's so great.
One of the things that God was so gracious with me was I had decided to kind of run a a Bible study and a small group for young teachers who were new at Grace International School. And so a lot of times we want to help our teachers grow professionally, but we also want to help them to grow emotionally and spiritually while they're serving at Grace. And so I thought one of the ways I could help with that was to take a group of them and do some kind of study with them. And God in his kindness led me to a study called The Sacred Slow. And it was all about slowing down and learning how to be with God in new ways. And so that was great preparation for the pandemic when so many of these teachers had more time to slow down and to be alone with God. And so it was just a neat study of God, just looking at who he is, understanding who we are, how he's uniquely made us and gifted us, and then how he has called us to be with him in different ways that really strike the chord of who we are as people. So just really neat to see, one of the ladies coming out of that, she actually was a leader at Grace. She's on the higher administration level, and she just said she learned things about herself and the way that God loves her and views her, and she understood God in new ways, and just really experienced his love in new ways through some of these practices and exercises that we did together. So I'm grateful for this time that we had, that God used us to prepare us to have more time on our own.
Yeah, that's awesome. So now you guys, your situation is a little bit different than, just with your influence in so many different platforms and streams. You've been missional as vocational pastors, as missionaries overseas, working in the secular workplace, and just continuing to be missionally minded, and trying to live out our mission at the Well, which is to love people into deeper levels of relationship with Christ. And so tell us a little bit about that and how you stayed focused and on mission in all of those various streams of influence.
So much of it for us has just been part of the impact of just how we grew up as people. So I grew up as a missionary kid in Indonesia, watching parents on mission for their whole lives to essentially just tell the people of Indonesia, one of the least reached countries in the world, about the story of Jesus. So their example modeled for me a life of staying open and the adventure it was to just follow after whatever God had. So that hugely influenced me as a student and as a kid. And as I grew up, it just continued to encourage me to be somebody that would just stay open to whatever God was calling me to do. And so that's led Karyn and I to all kinds of places of ministry, whether it started off in Cambodia even before we went to Thailand, and now has us in Thailand working with the lives of students. So I think so much of it for me has been just continuing to remind myself of the simple things, even being reminded of the triple challenge, which is so important at the Well, of making sure that we're staying grounded every day in Scripture and choosing to listen to how the Spirit speaks to us from his living word, and making sure that we continue to just talk with Jesus, not just formally as we open Scripture, but even throughout the activities of the day. More and more as I get older, I recognize that God's Spirit goes before me. And so much of my job is just to watch him and to sense how he's moving around me and to keep in step with him. That's something that Paul says in Galatians: since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And so much of the adventure of serving, of following Jesus, is just keeping in step and being willing to be interrupted with whatever plans I have, just to follow after whatever God has. So that's led us to Thailand, to be in ministry with students, to hopefully teach them to live with that kind of openness. That's really the essence of the goal we have with students at Grace International School. We're to be equipping students to influence the world for Christ. So it's not just about being great students. It's really about being students who open themselves up to see the ways that their loving Father is at work around them all the time, all day long, even in very simple ways, to just give them this profound sense of reassurance that God has a good plan for them. He's alive. He's with them. He has good plans for them that they can trust. And so it's really such a blessing for us to be able to give students opportunities to serve and use their gifts when they're young, because we see that connection of the student who's able to serve and use their gifts with a long-term relationship with Jesus. So if they can lead chapel and learn what it means to give a testimony in chapel, that habit can be a practice that becomes true of them as they grow older as well. So in that way, how we grew up has become ways that we're in ministry with students as well.
I think for me too, it just takes on different facets as a mom, and I taught English as a second language with World Relief in the Chicago area before we went to Thailand, and just see how God is, in His graciousness, just using that in my life again. I'm able to help with some testing and assessment for students. So being missional for me one day may look like going into school and helping with some of the testing and assessments, but what I have the opportunity to do is to make this little third grader feel comfortable, to feel relaxed, to feel loved before he even begins to take that little English test that we do. So I think that's what being missional is just allowing God to use you wherever you're at. Before we came overseas, for me as a stay-at-home mom, sometimes it looked like, or working part-time anyway, it could look like keeping the neighbor's son after school 2 days a week so that she could continue on in her work and providing for their family. And so it's just different things. It could be, another time a neighbor knocked on our door because another neighbor had lost someone in their family, and they just wanted someone to come and sit with them. So many times it's being available to be used by God in a moment where He just will use you in an ordinary life circumstance. And so we're just grateful for those opportunities that we have to be on mission, and just this mission of really just loving people, right? And loving them so that they can come to know the Christ that we know and the hope that we have in Him.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our annual Serve Day actually coming up this weekend on July 11th. And so can you guys tell us just how you'd recommend that we be missional, how everyone can be missional, sort of where they're at right now, and for this upcoming weekend? And also, what would you recommend for those who are considering long-term missions as their potential calling?
Again, just for the neighborhood one, right? It's just about being available and allowing God to lead you. So just be asking God for opportunities. Almost every time I ask God for an opportunity, He gives it to me. So I think if we are praying and asking God for those opportunities and looking out for them and asking the Spirit to just move in our hearts, if we need to take time out, God could just be laying on your heart, oh, I haven't called so-and-so for a while. Maybe I should just actually pick up the phone and call them rather than texting them. Just pay attention to those ways that God nudges you and moves you. And I think He kind of grows and develops your heart. And as you're walking with Him, He's growing your heart to be like His and wants you to seize those opportunities that He has for you. So I would say look for Him in those small things and just be faithful in praying and loving God and loving those around you.
Yeah, I think so much of it is, as the well just encourages all of us to really continue to find ways to move people into deeper levels of relationship with Jesus. As we look to serve, one of the greatest ways we can model true service is to make sure that we are leading ourselves well. So we need to make sure in our own hearts we're investing in moving deeper into our relationship with Christ ourselves. So we're becoming more attuned to the voice of the Spirit. As we do that in our own lives, like I said before, and like we've seen so many times in our lives, God opens opportunities for us, often in very simple, seemingly sort of insignificant ways that then can create pathways for neighbors to move then into a deeper sort of understanding who Jesus is, even by looking at our lives and how we were willing to be interrupted in those situations. So the older I get, the more I understand that it's important to lead myself well if I really want to serve with integrity. So my inner life with Christ needs to demonstrate and model that same type of exterior life that I have. That as God does that miraculous work of change, moving me deeper into my knowledge of Him, He gives me joy as I'm able then to live that out with others. So if I skip that step, somehow the service can really not really be as impactful, because it's all about just staying busy and doing something that maybe looks good on the outside, but I know there's a gap between what my head knows and what my hands are experiencing as I'm living those things out. So I think having that integrity between our inner life and our outer life is so impactful in making sure that we're living on mission. As far as staying open to whatever God might do for a calling for the future with international missions, or wherever it is, wherever we are, I think that's the thing that's so important, is God is going to call people to cross borders and cross boundaries every day, whether it's most importantly right in our neighborhood. And as we begin using those muscles, I think it's very, very common for people to start sensing God's love for the whole world, and perhaps being willing to make a more bold move to cross perhaps a bit more, much more significant geographical line, like maybe a county line, like a country line, to be able to trust Him with whatever He would have to do there. And I think too, another important thing to do as well, which has been important for us, is to have people who have gone before us to be mentors for us. So finding people who have gone and followed God wherever He's called them, to be people who speak into your lives regularly. So seek out those who can encourage you, who can pray for you. Both Karyn and I have different people who were more experienced sort of global missional workers who were inspirations for us when we were younger, and invested in our lives and taught us and modeled for us the way that we could go. So it's important to find somebody who can mentor you in that process as well.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. If you sense God nudging and moving you toward ministry overseas, just pay attention to that and ask God, what are you doing here? And I think openness is the biggest thing. Yeah, that's how my calling came, was having lunch with a missionary, and she said most people are not willing to go overseas. And I thought, well, I think I'm willing. So I just began to pray about it. And she said, she encouraged me, pray about it. And yeah, within the next year or so, I had, fallen into missions and kind of pursued that pathway. And so I just encourage people, if you feel God nudging, pay attention to that nudging and follow up on it. Contact us, contact you, contact, whoever you can to just get encouragement and help along that way.
Yeah, I think so much of it, even in our stories, I think back about our departure to Thailand. When we started making plans to go to Thailand, it was May of 2014, and we needed to be in Thailand fully funded as missionaries with Teach Beyond in August. And as we contacted people initially, they just said, that's impossible. It's going to take you years to get there. But for me, it just affirms that if it's God's plan for us, we just need to trust Him and sort of keep up with Him. And that's what one of our leaders in Teach Beyond encouraged us with. He said, we are willing to move with you at God's pace. So wherever God's going, we're just going to keep up with you. And in that sense, it becomes such a joyful process. Yes, it has challenges, the goodbyes, the separation, but it's also filled with lots of energy and vitality, because you sense God at work, and He's going to provide for you to be able to get to the place that He's calling you to. So again, it's having this openness, this joy, this expectation that if God has a plan, He's going to get you there.
That's so awesome. That's so good. Well, thank you guys so much for just your time and willingness to be with us this morning. All right.
You're very welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to reach out to us. We're so grateful to be partners with The Well. It's been 6 years now, and we can't wait to see what God is going to continue to do as we anticipate heading back as soon as Thailand opens up for us this summer. That's still a bit of a question mark, so you can be praying that all those details for us to be able to get back in this pandemic work out, and that we'll continue to share the stories of what God is doing as He paves the way for us in Thailand, as we can connect with you guys at The Well as well.